Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Security Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast, starting a Security Champions program. My name is Brendan Collins, and I will guide you through this journey where we discuss the whys and the hows of security champions. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about who I am, who's talking to you today. I'm a senior consultant here at Optiv, and I've been with the organization for going on 10 years, all 10 of those years specifically in application security. I began my work at Optiv as a penetration tester, web and mobile and API assessor. But most recently, I have focused my attention on securing the entire SDLC and what that means from a programmatic level. I lead our secure SDLC technical affinity group here at Optiv. That tag discusses all things secure SDLC, from frameworks like OWASP SAM and BSIM to the nuts and bolts of how to properly assess and design and create future states for our clients. Before Optiv, I've spent 15 years in mobile and web design and development. But now I find an incredible amount of satisfaction and joy in helping organizations assess, design, roadmap, and implement a future state for their application security program. Personally, when I'm not advising on securing the SDLC and designing future state for folks, I really enjoy baseball and softball. They're my favorite things. Watching my son play, coaching my daughter's fast pitch team. That's my travel team right there. And a great group of young ladies. And I really, really enjoy the opportunity to coach and to build into their lives. I'm also a football fan, a soccer fan for us US Americans. It's a rarity here in the States. I'm a big Chelsea fan. It's been a tough year for my Blues, but I'm really looking forward to next year. I really enjoy spinning vinyl on my 1963 Magnavox Astrosonic. It's just over my monitor here, so it keeps me company when I work. And then getting outside any chance I get. Hiking. We have a beautiful metro park system here in Northeast Ohio, and any kind of family adventure. That's what you'll find me doing when I'm not helping you secure your SDLC and your AppSec program. So let's go ahead and get into the meat of this. The whole premise is there's a security problem. We're all aware of it. It's the reason I have a job. It's probably the reason you're here. So I want to better define this security problem, perhaps from an angle that we haven't talked about yet as an industry. So first, I want to look at the trends in spending. Spend on security, and I mean this can be anywhere from tooling to services, has been increasing. You could see the statistic here from Cybersecurity Ventures. It predicts over the coming years, the global cybersecurity spend in billions of dollars will increase by about 15% year over year. So by the time we get to 2025, where I am right here, the global cybersecurity spend is expected to be over $458 billion. It's a lot of spend. What we do know for sure is that 71% of organizations plan on an increase in their cybersecurity budget sometime over the next 3 years. So even in this current economic state, organizations are either slightly increasing or at least keeping steady their cybersecurity budget. But here's the problem. Global cybersecurity spend is still on this graph. It's just the really small blue column now. This is comparing our global cybersecurity spend, excuse me, to the global cost of cyber crimes. These numbers are all in the billions. So over the same 5-year period that Cybersecurity Ventures predicts a 15% year-over-year growth in cybersecurity spend around the globe, the predicted increase of cyber attacks and their cost is also expected to increase by about 4.5 trillion. That's trillion with a T, not billion with a B. So what that boils down to is for every dollar we are spending on cybersecurity across the globe, whether that is a product or a service, cyber criminals are creating $2,571 worth of damage. For every dollar we spend on cybersecurity, the bad guys are doing $2,571 worth of damage. That is our security problem. But it's not so simple as how much money can we throw at the problem. It's an interesting statistic to look like, and I think it tells a story, but we can't exactly call this a direct one-to-one correlation and a cause and effect. We can't simply just throw more money at the problem and expect trends to change. My theory, what I'm going to propose to you today, is that cybersecurity, above all else, is human. Verizon publishes a DBIR report year over year. And in their most recent from 2022, they reported that 82% of all breaches are a result of human error. Similarly, over that same time frame, there was a little bit earlier, there was a study done between Tessian and Stanford University, which they calculated that number around 88%. Now, human error is anything from falling prey to a social engineering attack, or insecure storage or misconfiguration of a component that was a human responsibility to do. Most of this, though, is from falling prey to social engineering, phishing, vishing, smishing attacks. 82 to 88% of all breaches are a result of human error. Again, cybersecurity is human, not necessarily technical. So we've looked at costs of global cybersecurity spend versus the cost of cybercrime. So what are we spending on security awareness? So these numbers are in the billions. This is the same exact time frame from 2021 to 2025. So we see a similar increase in spending. This trend line is very similar to the increases when we looked at global cybersecurity spend. These numbers are in the billions. Well, let's go ahead and compare these numbers again to global cybersecurity spend. There's an even smaller fraction. Again, those orange are still there at the bottom. Those are our numbers for awareness. So the awareness spend versus overall global spend, it's incredibly tiny. Again, these numbers are in the billions. So awareness training that's designed to educate and to tackle and to potentially mitigate the sort of attacks that lead to 82 to 88% of all data breaches, that spend on that training accounts for a whopping 1.6% of our global cybersecurity spend. And again, I'm not advocating for a one-to-one ratio on our spend. We're not going to be able to quantify that sort of return on investment. So I'm not advocating for hundreds of billions of dollars in awareness training. Instead, I'm using this data to ask a question. Are we perhaps, even in a small amount, misappropriating our resources to focus on machines and technology to fix a human problem? So then what is the solution? Since I'm not proposing that we just simply spend more on the human element in awareness training, what is the solution I am proposing? Here's a quote from Andrew Beckett. He's a managing director for EMEA and for Kroll's cyber risk practice. This quote is very interesting. I've underlined and add some emphasis, which is mine. Effective cybersecurity is not just about technology. Often companies buy their latest software to protect themselves from hackers, but fail to instigate the data management process and education of employees required to mitigate the risks. The majority of data breaches and even many cyber attacks could be prevented by human vigilance or the implementation of relatively simple security procedures. Friends, much of cybersecurity is cultural and psychological. It is human, not necessarily technical. Yes, I said what I said. So, since we're talking about culture and that culture is how we change human behavior, let's talk about what it is. Well, before I could talk about what it is, let's talk about what culture is not. And this comes from my experience in assessing organizations of all shapes and sizes and their application security program. So here is what culture is not. It's not a program. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Aren't I here to talk about security champion programs? Well, simply having a program is not in and of itself culture. I've seen a lot of organizations that have a program in place, but their culture is still very far away from a security centric culture. Culture is not policies and standards. You can create policy and write standards all day long and have a very thorough library and knowledge base of security policies and standards. That does not change an organization's culture. One of my favorite consequences. You could say, do this or else. It is your responsibility. It is our expectation that you do these things. That does not instill culture. What about offerings? We offer a training course. We offer conferences and webinars. We offer, even like a prize or awareness for the person who clicks on the least amount of phishing emails and our phishing exercises. That alone is not a culture. Culture is not what we say. This is the biggest breakdown. I've seen organizations who have programs, policies, consequences, and offerings and understand they still have a shift to do culturally. The first place they go is to start with messaging and saying the right things. That does not move culture. So instead, what is culture? This is a list that I think is going to create the foundation for why we do security champions programs and what their intent is. First of all, culture is conversations. Not talking to people, but a conversation is both ways. It's speaking, it's hearing, it's listening, it's eliciting more feedback. Tell me more about that. It's having conversations about security. Telling someone they need to do things that will make an organization and their assets more secure is one thing, but having a conversation about hows and whys and roadblocks and frustrations is completely another. Culture is your social behaviors. How do we behave? How does our organization act? What are our attitudes towards security? It's what we encourage. What are the things we see and reward and recognize and call out? Because what ultimately we encourage, we create more of. It's what we repeatedly do. A program is not something you could set up once and say, look, we've instilled the culture. It was Will Durant who said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Not Aristotle, Will Durant. I almost made that mistake. Most importantly, culture is more scalable. Culture is more scalable. Once you have a champions program in place and are committed to changing culture, not just instituting a program, you'll find the scalability to be a little less expensive and a little more exponential in its growth. Changing culture is more scalable. So again, 82 to 88% of all breaches are a result of human error. If we could work on shifting culture and changing behavior and see these numbers decrease, what a difference it would make in the statistic of the cost annually of cybersecurity breaches and events. Security change can be most impactful through cultural change. So let's get into the meat of it. What is a champion? This section is going to be focused on defining, and finding security champions within your organization. So first and foremost, what does it take to be a champion? What are we looking for in someone to be a security champion? Who can be a champion? It's simple. Anyone who is curious. It is by far the greatest human trait and behavior, honestly, for anyone interested in security, but especially to be a champion. Are they the slightest bit curious about application security, about keeping themselves and their coworkers more secure, about securing the assets and the applications within the organization? Notice I did not say they need to be a subject matter expert, have certain certifications, have so many years experience in security. None of that is as important as the simple act of curiosity. Because if an individual is curious about security, they're going to want to learn. They're going to want to grow. They're going to want to share with their teammates what they're learning about about security, being a champion. And when they share that information, that is precisely what you want out of a champion. You could possibly create a list of other requirements, and that's fine. But first and foremost, on your list of requirements for a security champion should absolutely be curiosity. Anybody can be a champion. And a variety of personnel within your SDLC and adjacent to your SDLC is exactly what you want in a champions program. You want engineers, you want project managers, you want product leads, you want someone from HR, you want someone from, any part of the organization. These do not necessarily need to be technical individuals. They simply need to have curiosity. So, what's the role of the champion? What are we going to have our champions do? Well, first and foremost, there is no one size fits all security champion's role. Every organization I've worked with when it comes to champions has its own little spin and take on it based on the company's needs. Some of these are smaller companies and have very specific needs to just get their AppSec program off the ground. Some are very, very large, global, and have more of a need to make consistent security practices across teams. It, by and large, depends. Instead, what I will share is what are some common rules, some principle or foundational rules for people when it comes to being a champion. So even though there's no one size fits all role, all champions are advocates in some form. By advocate, I mean someone who is open and publicly supporting or recommending the cause, the policy of security within your organization. Notice I didn't say like policing or enforcing, right? They're simply supporting and recommending it. So what areas can they advocate for? Well, again, since there's no one size fits all approach, there can be any number of areas, but here are some of the most common and effective. First of all, the word of the day, culture. They are simply through their actions, behaviors, their conversations, and what they're doing day in and day out, leading by example, they advocate for culture. They advocate for awareness. Do we understand that this is a problem? This is a concern. Do we understand the impact both ways of not having proper security in place and having proper security in place? They advocate for awareness throughout the organization. They help promote security standards. They advocate for this is the way we do things from a security perspective here at our company. They advocate for those standards, they promote them, they teach them, they help to uphold them and make sure they're being applied. They advocate for becoming technical subject matter experts. There are so many things within the SDLC that are highly specialized and technical. Champions can be advocates for drilling really deep into one of those areas. We'll talk about some of those areas later. But again, they can advocate for any number of things. These are just some of the more common and effective areas that security champions advocate for. So let's get a little more specific and talk about what security champions will do. What do you want your champions to do at your organization? What is going to be their role? Well, we first need to start with a mission that isn't terrible. Listen, a lot of organizations work long and hard to come up with mission statements and vision statements and statements that should encourage and rally people. But what they usually end up with is something pretty flat. So I'm going to propose a very simple framework, and I do mean simple, that can guide the launch and progress of your champions program. First of all, at all costs, avoid puffery, avoid lingo, avoid buzzwords. From a consultant perspective, those words tend to fall a little bit flat. We lose what their meaning is, especially if there's some intricacies and subtext behind it. We lose that. So I propose keeping things incredibly simple enough that anybody else can repeat it. And even if you're 3 layers down, playing the telephone game, even if you're 3 people down the road and playing telephone, that message is still very clear and understandable. Here's a framework I recommend, and I'll leave this on the screen for a moment so you could jot it down. The mission of our company's security champions is to what through how, so that ultimate goal. The mission of our security champions is to what through how, so that ultimate goal. So we're going to talk about what, how, and ultimate goal here. Okay, but that's essentially what your mission statement should look like. Do not overthink this. I promise, do not overthink this. We get this to be too much. We put too much thought into it. We expand it out too far. We wordsmith it too much. It'll lose its impact. So the first what I want to talk about is just knowing the current state of application security within your organization. I think this is a foundational habit for all security champions and a foundational role for your champions program. They should know the current state of maturity for your application security program and the roadmap for how to improve it. The graphic I'm showing you right here is a graphic of OWASP's SAM model, Software Assurance Maturity Model. It lays out 5 business functions, everything from far left governance and design to far right operations and management. And it lays out underneath those 15 total different security practices. OWASP SAM measures all of these things on a maturity level, scores them out so you know exactly where you are, and can create a very clear roadmap on what you want to do next. Security champions should have insight into this. Now, maybe you don't use OWASP SAM, maybe you use something else, but as long as they have an idea of where you are currently from a maturity aspect and where you plan on going, that is concrete. So again, at a high level, your champions should be somewhat of an expert on this maturity model, whether it's OWASP, SAM, or another. They should know how to measure and assess. Security champions should increase security awareness in your organization. They should enforce security best practices. You want them to become some kind of domain expert. This is what I mentioned about becoming a technical subject matter expert. Maybe that's in a specific tool set or a specific skill like threat modeling. They should organize security events. And what else? You tell me at a high level, what are your security champions going to do within your organization? These are just some bullet points to get the conversation going. Again, because there's no one size fits all, every organization's champions program might look a little bit different. So at a high level, how will your champions act? What are they going to be doing from a day-to-day basis? Well, they're growing their expertise and knowledge. They're learning new things. And then they're sharing that knowledge with their teams or their groups. They'll probably advocate for security. There's that word again. And they'll probably collaborate across the SDLC. They'll work with other teams, other personnel to continue to grow the maturity of your AppSec program. And they will serve the entire organization. A service mindset and a champion is fantastic. Sometimes the allure of gaining knowledge, becoming a subject matter expert can be, it can bring on a selfish sort of behavior and attitude in people. Look what an expert I've become. Ultimately, you want your security champions to be excited to serve others within their organization. And then lastly, we've talked about the how and the what. What's the ultimate goal? Okay, at this point, you're allowed to add a little bit of puffery. We want this part to be enticing, maybe even a little bit exciting to people. So what's the ultimate goal? To assure that our assets are properly secured. An ultimate goal could be so that the company and its clients are more secure. The ultimate goal could be to create subject matter experts within security. Remember, they don't necessarily have to start there. They just have to be curious and they can become that subject matter expert. Or maybe the goal is to drive overall application security maturity within your org. Any one of these things, or again, you could pick something yourself, can be the ultimate goal. So let's take some of these hows, whys, and ultimate goals and plug them into our framework to see what kind of mission statements we can come up with. So the mission of companies, security champions, is to increase security awareness through growing and sharing their knowledge so that the company and their clients are more secure. Very simple. Very direct, very easy to remember and tell to other people. I'm going to move my face out of the way for this next one. So here's the next one. The mission of the company security champions is to create subject matter experts through security growth and learning so that the overall maturity of AppSec can increase. Do you see how we could plug and play any number of hows and whats and ultimate goals into this statement? The framework is fantastic because it keeps things clear and concise and gives you something to work in, but at the same time allows the flexibility for you to make this your own. All right. We've talked about what they're going to do, why they're there, some simple, high-level mission statements you could put together. You're convinced that you might need and want a security champion program at your org. All right, so how are we going to execute this program? Let's first of all talk about the intake process. What are security champions going to intake? What are they going to consume? All right. So at a minimum, there should be monthly meetings. You may kind of tailor that frequency based on your company's needs. But at a minimum, they should be getting together on a regular basis to talk about things security. They should talk about events or issues that are relevant to your industry and company at the time. And they should talk about ways to take their knowledge and their expertise back to their team. All right. This monthly meeting should not be a mandate to action per se. It should be a coming together and a culture building exercise for your champions. It should be an empowering moment. So then afterwards, they feel enabled to go forth and make security disciples of everyone in their organization. Security champions should have a tailored training plan. This should be separate from the security training you're already doing, whether it is security awareness training or perhaps specific role specific training that you've built as part of your training program. There should be a track for security champions, and it might include elements of both of those, but that should be done. That training plan should be role and goal dependent. What are you as an organization hoping to do? If it's a brand new program, you might want to train your champions on a maturity model so they know how to assess and measure. Threat modeling is an incredibly popular one. Train them on threat modeling if some of them are supposed to be modeling. If you have specific tools in your pipeline that you want them to be able to correctly tune and utilize and maximize its usage, train them on that specific tool. From an intake perspective, we want to encourage certifications, conferences, other growth opportunities for them as a security professional. Move myself back up there. There we go. So what kind of output should you expect from your champions? At a minimum, they should share knowledge and updates with their teams. At a minimum, whatever they acquire, learn, achieve through everything on that last slide, monthly meetings, conferences, certifications, webinars, trainings, they should be equipped to share that knowledge and those updates with their teams. Can they speak at lunch and learns? Can they present quickly at Scrum meetings? That's going to depend on your organization, but this path should be clear, not only for your champions, but for the teams that they're going back to. They should know that these people need the opportunity to share. There should also be some kind of security related activities that they are part of. This is really the gold of a security champion program. Once you've assessed your program and you have a roadmap and you know where you want to go as an AppSec program and how to get there, this is where you can start plugging in security champions to multiply and expand the resources of your security department. Listen, you're probably already overtaxed and under-resourced. Security champions are a great extension of your security department itself. For example, again, I'll go back to threat models. This is a super common, very effective activity for champions to take part in. They learn how to threat model. They can teach others how to threat model, and they can own those models. So throughout the entire design process, modeling and architecture, they have insight as to the data flows and structure of the application, what the possible threats are, and what the proper mitigations are. What an incredible knowledge base for a champion to have. They could create and update policy. Listen, as they learn and go back over existing policy statements, or maybe they find a need for a new policy statement, they could help create that, update it, share with everybody this new policy and standard, and then make sure it is stored in your library, in your knowledge base, and kept up to date. What a great activity for a security champion to do. And it gives a security champion a real sense of contribution, of ownership, if they're helping to create and update and evangelize these policies. They advise on tools. If they become a subject matter expert in a specific spot in your tool chain, not only will they know well the tools you're doing, but when it comes time to vet possible replacements, they have really deep insight that you might not otherwise have into that tool, and can make recommendations and vet new tools so you're plugging the best possible tool into your pipeline. And they can lead remediation efforts. This is super common as well. They make sure any bugs that come from security testing activities are logged properly. They make sure that SLAs are enforced, and they actually help their team research and remediate those problems. So these are some common outputs for security champions. But again, these are dependent largely upon your organization, its current maturity, and your goals. Again, there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all approach. So you need to be taking these as kind of principal or foundational things, but making sure they fit your program. Okay, we need to measure. We absolutely need to measure your program because of the old saying, if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it. This is completely and utterly true, especially in this case. If you're starting a security champion program from scratch, setting up metrics now is a great way to assure that your program grows and matures, but it's also a fantastic way to quantify the impact of your champions on the security posture of your organization. No one will ever have to say, I wonder if this champion's program is actually making a difference. If you're setting, tracking metrics and KPIs, you could point to the evidence clearly. So typically, champion metrics come in 3 different flavors. We could probably slice and dice these any number of ways, but if you stick to these 3 areas of metrics, you'll have a good, robust set for measuring. So first is growth. Measuring the growth of your champions program, how many people are in it. Measuring engagement, how engaged those champions are in the program itself. And then from an activity standpoint, are the champions going forth and doing the things that you hope they will do? So let's break these down. Let's start with some growth metrics that you should be tracking. First is simple. It's a number of champions. This is a very simple counting statistic, and it's perfect for new programs. How many champions do we have? How many champions did we have last month? What's the trend? Are we meeting our goals? Another one is champion density. Champion density gets to the idea of how broad is our program. Are an appropriate number of development teams represented? Are an appropriate number of SDLC adjacent personnel represented? Do we have QA in here and the IR team in here? Do we have architects in here? Do we have project managers and product owners in here? Champion density is a great rate statistic to measure how broad the program is. Message reach. This is an important but slightly more nuanced metric. When you are starting your program or trying to grow your program at any rate, you want to make sure the message of your champions program, what it does and what the benefits are, is properly communicated out. This is some internal marketing that needs to happen. And while slightly more difficult to quantify, it's completely worthwhile if you're wondering how far out your internal marketing messages are going. So it's a simple number, and this could be a number per event, a number per announcement, how many people are attending, how many people received an email, how many people respond, how far out is your message going. We want to make sure what we're talking about is reaching the right people. So how about some engagement metrics? Well, first and foremost, it's meeting attendance. If you're meeting on a regular basis, which you should be, how many people are attending? And this could be a raw count, but I recommend a rate statistic. What percentage of the champions on our roster are attending meetings? Because if I told you 10 people attended, that doesn't tell you a lot. Is it 10 out of 11? Well, that's fantastic. Is it 10 out of 80? well, that's not so fantastic. So while it can be a counting metric, I highly recommend a rate metric or a percentage. Feedback rate. This is a really important one, and this goes even deeper than a meeting or event attendance. This is a rate statistic that shows how many of your champions are responding to requests. This could be a survey, it could be a request for feedback or input. How many are actually responding when you reach out to them with questions or input? Typically, for uh, organizations measuring these things, we see a meeting statistic, or excuse me, an attendance statistic, a little bit lower than the population of your champions. And we typically see a feedback rate even lower than that. The bigger the gap between your total champions, how many attend, and then how many actually provide feedback or input, the larger the gap between those, the more alarming it should be. So these are good statistics to compare to one another. So what about some activity metrics? Well, training completion is a great one. Ultimately, foundationally, you want your champions to attain and acquire knowledge and expertise so they can then express and share that within the SDLC and organization. So if you've set up a training program, you want to be able to track through that uh, LMS, that learning management system dashboard, how many are actually taking it, and then how many are completing it. So training completion could have a number of different expressions. How many are taking or have started training, how far along they are, and how many have completed the training. This could also evolve into how consistently people are engaging in a new training. So start with baby steps. So if you just need to start with how many people are just engaging in a training module, that's a great place to start. Adoption of security practices. I kept this one kind of generic because, as we saw a number of slides ago under the activities, security champions can do any number of things from an activity standpoint that are specific to security practice: threat modeling, tooling, setting up a knowledge base or library of standards and policies. So whatever that security practice is, we want to be able to measure how many champions are doing that practice within their scope. So let me explain it to you this way. This is a rate statistic. How many champions are taking that activity back to their teams or groups? So it can be a general statistic like, how many threat models have we completed versus total number of applications that we want to threat model. And if that is a specific activity that you want your champions doing, that's the sort of metric that you track. How many standards or policy documents have been updated in our knowledge base? Any sort of security practice that you want your champions or a large enough group of your champions performing, you could have an adoption rate to see if it's getting put into action. So those are just some examples of metrics that will help you measure the effectiveness of your program from a growth, engagement, and activity standpoint. So once you've kind of defined those metrics for your Security Champions program, and you've collected enough information to make some reasonable outcomes from that. For example, you've identified a trend, you've seen a consistent enough score across a certain metric. Once you're able to have some outcomes from that, then you should have enough information to start to commit to goals and objectives for those metrics. And we express those through KPIs. I don't want to make this too much of a primer on KPIs, but I think it's important that first you collect enough data. Then you need to identify any trends. Is this number growing like we want it to? Is this number having a hard time gaining traction? Is this number actually decreasing and going the way we don't want it to go? Then we could set a goal. So for example, let's go with a simple growth metric of champion density. Right now we have security champions across 20% of our development groups and teams. And it's kind of stuck there. Well, we want to set our goal. We want our security champion density to increase to 50% by the end of the next quarter. That is our what and our when. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to ramp up our internal marketing campaign. We're going to invite some people from these specific teams to events. It could be any number of things for the how, but the KPI should have a what. What is it going to be? 50%. When? By the end of next quarter. And then the how can be discussed as to the tactics you're going to take to get there. Setting these KPIs and then working towards that goal, there should always be a cadence of reassessing. By no stretch of the imagination do I believe that KPIs you set are always achieved. I think if we're honest, there's plenty of times where the KPIs we set are not achieved. And that's okay. We need to have the practice of reassessing. Boy, that trend data from our metric isn't moving towards our goal either at all or at a pace we're not comfortable with or happy with. What do we need to change? Do we need to change the target itself? The what? Do we need to change the when? Do we need to change the how? Constantly reassess the goal, the KPI, and say, is our number one, is it the right one to set? And number two, is our what, when, and how correct? So I've said it, and I'll say it again. Champions need to be done your way. Your champions, your way. So we're going to talk about a couple additional things that'll be important when tailoring your Security Champions program for your success. Before I get into that, let me recap everything we've talked about so far. Number one, my premise here is that security is human before it is technological. It's absolutely technological, but the biggest return on our investment should be a human investment. Remember, 82 to 88% of all breaches are related to human error. Security culture is going to drive that behavioral change, right? It's not enough to have programs and mandates and say the right things. Remember what we said culture is not? It's not enough to say that you need to do these things and there are consequences and punishment. We need to change culture. It's culture that will drive behavioral changes. The greatest trait of a champion is curiosity. You want people who are curious and interested. They do not need to be subject matter experts. They don't need to have a resume. They don't need to have a background in security. You will help them build that resume and background. That's the beauty of champions, is that anybody can be one. Remember, there's no cookie cutter approach. You can take the things we've talked about in this presentation as kind of foundational principles, as a good jumping off point for designing and kicking off your champions program. Start with simple, clear, lingo-less mission. So if lingo-less isn't a word, it is now. Avoid things that are buzzy and trendy. Keep it simple so that when you play the telephone game with this mission statement, the third, fourth, fifth person down the row can not only clearly understand it, but then clearly explain it to the next person. That is how you're going to make your mission viral and have it spread for you. And then we've talked about some foundational principles of execution here in this presentation. Again, they're foundational and they're principles. Your execution or application of them will probably be tailored slightly towards your organization and its needs. And then you need to measure. You need to measure your program, set goals, and constantly be reassessing those goals. So, what else? I could sit here and talk about security champions for hours, and I have. But there are a number of different things we did not have a chance to discuss today that you should at least have in the back of your mind, written down off to the side. After you've built out these foundational things, these are areas you can explore with your team to enhance your security champions program. The focus of this was really laying foundation and kind of kicking things off. These are also things that I'm going to talk about right now that could help to grow and mature an existing security champions program. Number one, logo and branding. Listen, a security champions program should really have its own unique identity within an organization. It should have colors that are theirs, a logo that is theirs. I've seen taglines that are specifically theirs. Those things are super empowering. So once you have branding, colors, taglines, and a logo, you need swag. You need swag. And no slide presentation is complete without Michael Scott as a part of it. You need coffee mugs and lanyards and t-shirts and stickers and pins and all of those things. You need swag with your logo and branding all over it. You need events and contests just for your champions. There could be games, tabletop games. There could be hackathons and capture the flags. There need to be games and events specifically for your champions, and they should be fun. They should want to take part in these things. There should be rewards and recognition. Anytime a champion accomplishes something, does something, there should be a reward or recognition that goes along with that. I know a lot of organizations who have a security champions program have a level program. Some of them follow belts like in martial arts. Some of them just have levels like 1, 2, 3, and 4. And anytime someone achieves a new level, they get rewarded and recognized. Emails go out to their leadership. Their pictures posted on the SharePoint site. A big announcement and to-do is made. They get new swag. You should constantly be rewarding and recognizing your champions. Why are we doing things like this? Why are we doing a logo and branding and taglines and swag and events and rewards? To create FOMO, fear of missing out. You want not only to reward and encourage your champions, you want people who are not champions to say something special is going on in that group. I want to be a part of it. And remember, curiosity is the one thing you're after in a security champion. And if you can make people curious, a lot of your job for recruitment is done for you. Once this recruitment is done, we need to work on retention and engagement strategies. A lot of these things that I just listed above can be used as retention and engagement strategies, but more simple approaches are like annual goal setting, annual opt-ins. Do you still want to be a champion this year? Here's what we're working towards this year. Would you like to be a part of it? So constantly working on retention and engagement strategies for your champions. Listen, we've talked a lot about the why and the how for kicking a security champion program off. I hope, if nothing else, you come away from this thinking, maybe security is a little more human than I thought before. If that's all we've accomplished through this presentation, I will take that. And if you start to wonder how human security is after all, you need to consider something like a champions program to really begin to change the culture at your organization. So listen, I'm not here just to make a presentation and tell you what I think you should do and then leave you high and dry. Securing the entire SDLC is what I do. And specifically within securing the entire SDLC, I love security champions because it is human and it is cultural. Optiv is here to partner with you. So I'm going to leave my information up here on the screen. It is in all the Source Zero Con material, my abstract. You'll be able to find contact information with me. If you would like to discuss security champions, get an idea of maybe where you're at, I would love to take a couple minutes and chat with you about it. Optiv can help you not only assess the current state of your SDLC, it could help you define a future state, create a roadmap, an iterative roadmap with detailed initiatives to get you there, and then help you stand up and execute a champions program so you have all the help and resources you need to execute. It is what we do. It's what I do. It's what I love to do. So thank you so much for your time today. I cannot wait to hear from you. I'm actually available to talk about this just about any time you like via email. And I'm in our Discord channel now, actually. So again, my name was Brendan Collins. And on behalf of the entire Optiv team here at Source Zero Con, thank you so much for spending time with me. And I hope you found this encouraging and exciting. And I can't wait to hear about your Security Champion program.